Sure, it's my pleasure. Mhm. Well, it's probably not such a romantic story as others. I was going through my late teens and early 20s and kind of struggling with what I wanted to do with my career. And I was working several part-time jobs. None of them were incredibly fulfilling. Um, and just by sheer coincidence, back in the good old-fashioned newspaper in the classified ads, I saw a job opening for the city of Raleigh as a police officer, and I actually never thought about it before. But I thought, well, we'll give this a try, and if I don't like it, I'll move on. But if I do, there may be lots of opportunities on down the road. I 20, and I had just turned 21 when I found out I'd been accepted to the police academy. So I was quite young. A little bit of both. I think, at that stage, most young men have probably a little bit of a false sense of invulnerability, but I also knew the risks, and I just had figured that they would give me good enough training and equipment to hopefully get me through all that. And my father was a 30-year active duty veteran. He'd seen several combat tours in Vietnam, and so I was attuned to the potential risk. And just from understanding what he had been through and realizing what police officers do, I knew there was some risk, but admittingly, I probably wasn't um, fully aware or realistic. Um, well, I had been promoted. Well, I had been on the. I got hired in the department in 1987. Um, uh, and this incident occurred in 97. So obviously, I had been on for 10 years. I had been in uniform on patrol for uh, about 9 years and had got promoted to detective and had been a detective about 1 year prior to this incident. Yes, he came on the department a little bit after me, and he had just got promoted to detective about a week before this incident. Uh, Probably just getting to know him would be best. When I was still in uniform on patrol, Paul had worked on a different platoon, so our shifts were different. But I knew who he was just from passing him in the hallway, and it was always nice seeing him and speaking to him. He's just very pleasant guy. Then he got transferred to the platoon I was working on, a platoon actually, and got to know him a lot better. Just sitting and chatting during roll call before we all went out to go work. Maybe showing up on a couple calls together where our districts, we worked in different beats, excuse me. Maybe where the beats kind of combined, see them in the field a little bit. So, yeah, we were friends at work, to be sure. Yes, sure. Absolutely. Well, Paul and I were both assigned to drugs and vice units. And just to give you a little background before we talk about that morning, oftentimes the drugs and vice units were used as just supplemental hands, whether it was for surveillance or whether it was just for raw manpower doing interviews or street work. Oftentimes, back then, oftentimes the street drug units were pulled from that duty just to go help, especially major crimes, but whenever there was a need for just extra manpower. Well, um, on that morning, there was a homicide early in the morning. I think it was about 5 a.m., I guess, on Quarry Street. And it actually initially came out as a car accident. Um, there was a truck that had crashed into a telephone pole, and when EMS had got there, they said this isn't a car accident. This guy has been shot. And Michael Walker was the guy in the truck, and he was dead. So early in the morning, they responded to the homicide. Unfortunately, almost no leads for many hours. Um, Paul and I, only because of perhaps the side of town. It had a high drug, street drug sales, I suppose, were higher, but there was no evidence yet to determine that that's what it was, other than the geography, the where it had happened. Paul and I were both scheduled to work at later that night, actually, like a second shift, I suppose. But each of our squads got called in early. I want to say they called us both of our squads in early. I can't remember the exact time. Um, we got to the station maybe 3 o'clock p.m. or something. And again, they told us, hey, we got pulled again to go help major crimes with this homicide. They said some of you might be doing surveillance, some of you might just be doing street interviews, or however that we can supplement the folks out on the street. Because obviously the uniform patrols are out there and they're aware of the case and they're doing field interviews as they can, but they still have to monitor and respond to the 911 calls. So the uniform guys can't, so readily be pulled as a detective, drugs and vice detective. Um, so there was scant evidence to start with. We had a little briefing before we went out. Paul and I were actually on different drugs and vice squads, but we were all pulled in for one big briefing just to give us what they had, which was right, right. I'm sorry. Yes, 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 exactly. And that's why we were pulled for surveillance. We had plain everyday cars. Most of our cars were junkers that were seized from drug dealers or uh, uh, otherwise compounded cars. And we dressed just in regular clothes, jeans, t-shirts. Now we always had, ball caps and identifying stuff if we needed it. But yeah, and that's the reason that we were often pulled for surveillance is we could usually blend in with the community a little bit better, and it's easier to do street interviews oftentimes with plain clothes, walking up to somebody than perhaps a uniform. So we were given the briefing and uh, not much more information than I had already told you. In fact, they just said they had a homicide. They thought uh, very little information. Um, the major crimes gave us the briefing, and they said we don't we don't know much of anything yet. We have several people that we're looking for that were either suspects or they're vital witnesses, potential witnesses to the crime, and we're just looking for a whole bunch of people right now. And then they started divvying up assignments, and they were assigning uh, uh, the different drugs and vice detectives to different places and different assignments. Some folks were going to walk and talk, do interviews in the area. Some folks were going to set up on different houses where potentially uh, witnesses or maybe even suspects were at. But they said we don't have probable cause for an arrest. We don't even know who to arrest. We don't have any arrest warrants. We don't have search warrants. So, this investigation is still pretty, it just has scant information. Yeah. So anyway, Paul and I got assigned to survey 727 East Lenore Street. And the reason we were there is earlier in the morning, a few hours after the homicide, there were some detectives on the scene still walking around looking for clues. And somebody in the crowd had dropped a note near the detectives. And the detectives didn't notice it at first, but eventually they saw the note. And the note was just an anonymous tip that said, someone you should talk to got into the green cab number 123, or whatever the cab company was. I don't recall. And the detectives called their cab dispatch and said, yeah, there was somebody that got picked up on Quarry Street, and they were taken to 727 East Lenore Street. Um, so that's how the detectives told us that's our only lead. Whether this is somebody we needed to talk to because they were a suspect or because they were a witness, yeah, this person was on the scene and needed to be talked to. So Paul and I were assigned to do surveillance on that apartment. Paul, when he got promoted, had actually been riding that very beat, so he knew the area really well. He knew all the side streets, the alleys. He knew that area well. Um, so I was in my unmarked car. It was a beat up Subaru, and we obviously were in plain clothes. And Paul uh, said, "Look, there's probably a good vantage point here across the street from 727 East Lenore. There was a small, um, I, I suppose it was a street. To me, it looked more like an alleyway. Uh, yeah. We were in the same car, so we were paired up. So Paul said, "Let's set up here because it's good at vantage point," and it was. We were kind of hidden by trees, but we were a little higher than across the street, so we had a pretty good view of everything. And we that's where we sat. Right when we got there, one of the major crimes detectives drove up, and uh, we just asked him, "Hey, is there any change or new information? Is there warrants, or do we know who is who yet?" And he said, "No, there's really no change." I said, "If we see this guy that we're looking for that got out of the taxi cab, do you want to? Do we have paper on him?" He said, "No, we don't have arrest warrants, don't have probable cause. The most that we can do is just ask him to please come to the station to be interviewed. And if he doesn't want to, then call us and we'll come out and talk to him at his apartment." So that was the last kind of direction we were given. Well, um, it was just minutes after he left. We had been given a description from the cab driver, a very, very generic description, clothing, hairstyle, and whatnot. And just after the major crimes detective left us, it must have only been 5 or 10 minutes. I saw somebody matching that description come out of the apartment and kind of hang around under the stairwell of that apartment. And I said, "Hey, Paul," we had a pair of binoculars. I said, "Take a look. Does this guy look like the description we've been given?" Paul looked and he said, "Yeah, that's pretty close. We probably should go talk to him." So we drove down from our vantage point where we were, started to go across the street, and simultaneously this male started getting into a small little tiny SUV. It was a Suzuki Sidekick, tiny little car. But he was getting in the back seat on the passenger side. Um, and there was already a driver, a female, driving. He didn't see us, but we just happened to see him getting in. Um, so then I pulled the car into the parking lot of that apartment complex. And we got out, we put on our police ball caps, we have our badges on our belt, and there was a set of uh, people just standing around, pedestrians just around there was a nearby dumpster. And they were kind of close to me. I walked over, I said, "Raleigh Police, how's it going, folks?" And a couple of people said everything's cool here, and they kind of wandered off. And then Paul and I walked over to the Suzuki Sidekick, and that's when we started the talking to the two people in the Suzuki Sidekick. Well, in police tactics, we're taught you have a contact and cover officer. The contact officer does all the talking, and the cover officer watches that interaction, but also scans the whole area to make sure no one else is coming around. When, yes, exactly, and yes, it was a middle-aged female, and then this young man in the back. Now, when we first got out and I was talking to the folks at the dumpster, I was the contact officer because I was talking to them, and Paul stayed by the car and kind of looked over things while I was talking to them. But then we switched roles, and I stood at the back of the Suzuki, kind of behind it had a spare tire on the back, and kind of behind that, and I was kind of watching the driver and kind of watching who we now know as Kwame Mays was in the back seat. Paul, we call it slicing the pie. Paul slowly angled himself towards the door, and the whole time we're saying, "Hey, we're Raleigh Police. We just need to talk to you. Um, uh, you know, we just need to talk to you." And Paul said, "Can you put your hands on your knees?" And he was sitting with his hands tucked in between his thighs. And Paul said, "Hey, just go ahead and put your hands on your knees while we talk to you. We'll be done with this in just a few minutes. We just need to talk." And that's when everything went bad. I saw from the back, I saw the vehicle move, the suspension start to move, and I saw this guy in the back kind of lunge forward, and I heard a gunshot. And for just a split second, I wasn't sure who shot whom, because I didn't know if Paul saw something and he shot, or if this suspect had shot at Paul. I ducked down behind the spare tire and drew my pistol. The driver got out and was screaming and running and ran away. So I knew she wasn't a threat, and I didn't necessarily think she was involved with whatever was going on. And then Paul next to me, and still for a second, I wasn't sure if he tripped trying to get to cover, or if he was injured. So he laid there, and the way I'm describing this, it sounds like it's taking forever, but you got to understand this is all in microseconds, yes. And when Paul was laying there, I kind of shook him, like, come on, to motivate him, like, let's go, let's get behind the car. And that's when I knew that he was either unconscious or worse. There was no blood at that time. And I didn't see any injuries on him, and so I wasn't quite sure what happened. But then I glanced up into the back window, and I saw the suspect, Mr. Mays, starting to turn around. I could see his upper body shifting uh, towards the back of the car, and I figured this is it. This guy's the threat, and I think somebody shot, and he must have shot Paul, even though I didn't, at that time see any wounds. Um, so I stepped back to the corner of my car that was nearby, and I started to give him commands. I said, "Put your hands up." We're Raleigh Police. Put your hands up. Um, and he didn't say anything for a long time. And simultaneously, I did start to see Paul bleeding uh, from his ears and his nose. And I knew that I had to get to Paul to try and help, however he was hurt. Um, the guy in the back was still squirming around, and I got on the radio to call for help, because I knew that we had to get EMS there, the paramedics there for Paul. And also I wanted backup. What if this guy ran? What if he continued shooting? I don't know. So I got on the radio. Yes. Yeah. You are exactly correct. I stepped forward once or twice only to have Mr. Mays move in the vehicle, and kind of switch around, and I would have to step back behind cover again. And that happened 2 or 3 times, I guess. Um, Finally, I kept talking. I said, "Well, Raleigh Police, you need to put your hands up." Uh, and he said, "You shot me. I can't move." I remember him saying that. And but he was moving. I mean, I could see movement in the back seat. Um, so I could see that Paul's gun was still holstered, and I had heard a gunshot for sure. So I knew he was armed with something, and I told him, "Throw your gun out the window." I had. I'm sorry. Back when I was, and that's very important, and I missed it. When I was behind the Suzuki tire, and I told you I took a couple steps back to my Subaru to the undercover car. During that time, I fired 3 shots into the vehicle, and while I was walking back, and two of the bullets, of course, I didn't know this at the time. Two of the bullets disintegrated on the car frame. The third bullet did strike Mr. Mays in the shoulder. It actually broke his arm, but I didn't know any of this at the time, of course. No, no, it was I want to say 5 p.m. or somewhere around there, and it was summer, so it stayed, lighter later. Right. I did. It was back. I don't think they use codes anymore, but it was Signal 25, and that's just the worst possible thing. Um, and just kind of a side observation was it was actually, even though this was a horrible situation and I did not feel safe yet, it was somewhat comforting after I said Signal 25 to hear sirens 360 degrees. It seemed like they were coming from every part of the city, even off in the horizon where I could see hills or whatever. You could see blue lights off in the distance just coming from every direction. I mean, it's I suppose one of the perks of working in a big city. If you need help, there's lots of people that are gonna come. So yeah, I called for Signal 25, and I did say there was an officer down who's wounded, and the dispatchers, asked where are you at. I gave them the address. Unfortunately, in something that serious, there became a lot of radio chatter, a lot of people getting on the radio, to try to give directions or whatever. The It was 727 East Lenore. It was near Church Street. Um, I don't remember all the streets that are around there. Um, but it seemed like a long time that I was just at that standoff because Mays wasn't throwing out a gun. I couldn't get to Paul because Mays was still squirming around in the vehicle, and backup and paramedics hadn't arrived yet. Uh, and it seemed like a long time. I think in actuality it was only, I think they said 6 minutes maybe before the paramedics were in the area, and I think about the same time that a whole bunch of police units arrived. They Yes, yes, until the scene is secure, exactly. So I still remember the very first two officers that came up behind me. They said, "What's going on?" It was Billy Potter and Jennings Bunch. I'll never forget them. They said, "What's going on? What you got?" And I said, "Paul's down. He needs help, but there's somebody in the car who has a gun, and I, he's not following commands. I don't know if he's hurt or not, but so." As we're there, we shouted one more time to throw out the gun, and a pistol was thrown out of the car. Um, and we started walking up on the car, covering it with our weapons, and Mays started squirming around, and we thought, well, we don't know if he has another gun, or if there's another weapon in the vehicle. But we got close enough. Myself and Jennings Bunch kind of covered the back seat with our weapons, and Billy Potter was able to reach in and grab a hold of him and yank Mays out. As we pulled him out, um, he he had a bunch of nickel bags, marijuana nickel bags, and he was trying to eat those. Uh, as absurd as that is, I still remember that. and we were handcuffing him. And we once we got the last click was done on the handcuff, we screamed to paramedics to come over, that it was safe and to come get to Paul. Um, Paramedics started working on him as best they could there at the scene, but obviously he needed advanced care. And at that time, I still had no idea where he was shot or how bad he was hurt. Right, I did not. Um, and so paramedics scooped him up and took him to the emergency room. And I, at that time, the other officers were scooping Mays up and had him in cuffs, and they were, going to take him to. I don't even know where they took him to initially, whether it was the main station or where. But and he was saying, well, I didn't know that he was a police officer. That's what he started saying after when he was starting to walk away. Yeah, and just to skip, yeah, and just to skip forward, thankfully they found a bunch of those folks I talked to at the dumpster. They found several of them and got them to testify at trial. Yeah, they went, it was kind of begrudgingly, but fortunately they did testify and they were truthful. And yeah, and they said, yeah, we knew he was police. He had the badge. He said he was the police. Who didn't know he was the police? I mean, that was their exact words at the trial. So yeah, that I, I don't think that him saying he didn't know we were police. I just don't think that was valid. Well, yeah. Well, it was so I was kind of just in absolute adrenaline mode, and I couldn't focus or concentrate on anything for a few minutes. They had just wheeled Paul off into the ambulance, and they had just carted Mr. Mays off, and I was standing by myself. Actually, I saw dozens of officers were in the area, and they were stringing up tape, crime scene tape. They were starting to go out and talk to people, and I was just standing there in the middle of the parking lot, and all of a sudden, I got this. I don't know what, just a second adrenaline dump or something, but it just hit me like a ton of bricks that what had happened, and how bad this was. Uh, yes, yes, uh, yes. Mm-mm. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yes, exactly. I remember. Yes, the scene filled up very quickly with the news media. I do remember that now that you mention it, and of course, all sorts of detectives and just everybody from the department was there, and a whole bunch of other law enforcement agencies were headed that way when I was on the radio. So Highway Patrol, Wake County Sheriffs, you name it. If they wore a badge in Raleigh, they were headed that way, and yeah, yeah, they exactly. They'd wanted to help. Um, so when I was said I was standing there by myself, and I, one of the first people of all people was our police attorney, Don Bryant, who came up to me and said, "Patrick, are you okay?" I think she meant more physically than anything else, and I said, "Yes, ma'am." And she said, we need to get you to the station. And I think the two other people, I think an internal affairs sergeant came up and took my gun, and then a the other drugs and vice sergeant, the one that Paul worked for, came there, and he said, Patrick, man, I'm so sorry. He said, we got to get you to the station, and he drove me to the station, and they put me up in the drugs and vice office, and things have changed fortunately, but back in the day, when you were involved in a critical incident, unfortunately, everybody's was don't talk to them because you might do an interview wrong, or you might say the wrong thing, or now you have to be called into as a witness to the shooting, or so I was sitting there by myself for a long time actually in the office, And to answer your question, yeah, to answer your question, I can't remember if it was a major or maybe Chief Brown himself, but somebody came in and said, Patrick, Paul's died. Yeah, yeah, it was surreal. It just really didn't hit me, and I mean, obviously I was torn from the frame, but there was so much going through my mind. Who did we get all the suspects? Was there anybody else? All these now they seem absurd, but back then in the heat of the moment, some of these questions, what was there other people? Did they, were there other people with him? Who was this driver? What's going to happen to me? I mean, they train you if you're involved in a shooting. You're going to have two interviews. You're going to have to interview with Internal Affairs, and you're going to have to interview with the State Bureau of Investigation. So I knew that was coming, and that didn't necessarily bother me, but it was more on my shoulders. Um, yes, exactly. Mm, yeah, I exactly. No, um, so that night I had to go immediately interview with Internal Affairs, and that interview lasted a while. And I remember it being pretty late. I want to say midnight or 1 o'clock, and uh, I was just worn mentally and physically. And they said, will you be okay to come in tomorrow and do the SBI interview? I said, yeah, of course. And they put me on administrative leave, which I knew that was coming, which is essentially you just do clerical work until the district attorney's office reviews the case. Um, and that's fortunately it was the district attorney was Colin Willoughby at the time, and his office made their finding very quickly. I want to say it was less than 2 weeks. It might have even been quicker than that. And they said we're not there. There's nothing we're charging Niemann for. That's but and they said he can be released to regular duty if it's okay with you. Talking to the command staff. And the command staff, they they were sympathetic. They said, "Look, you've been released, but if you need some time to," uh, and I said, "Please don't send me home. I need to be here." It was just my mind was racing. Yes, yes, exactly. And after I had had the interviews with Internal Affairs and the SBI, then of course everybody was talking to me, and checking up on me. Very supportive. I thank them all. I wish I could remember all the people that came in and called or visited me at the office to see how I was doing. Um, so for the first few weeks, I just did caught up on typing up cases from other things I'd been doing before this incident. Drug cases, just trying to get myself focused because I wanted to be in the right place before I started doing police work, I guess you could call it again. So, I mean, it didn't take terribly long. I want to say maybe 4 to 6 weeks. And then I started back with my drugs and vice squad doing regular drugs and vice work. Well, that's an excellent question, and it's coincidental. Our department had just hired a police psychologist, Dr. Michael Teague, and he was just prior to that, maybe just a few months prior to that, he was trying to set up a critical incident stress debriefing team, which was kind of peer debriefers led by a licensed professional. And he'd been throwing around talk about that. Um, and I can't remember if it was established just before, I think it was just after the Hale shooting actually. And so Dr. Teague had me do a private debriefing with him, which was very helpful. An incredible man. And then I was one of the first people to go through a peer debriefing with the critical incident stress debriefing team that the department had. And I felt it really helped. I couldn't believe how much it helped. Just, they say talking it out and talking about it helps. And I'd always thought that there's no way that can help just talking about it. But it was stunning how much it did. Yeah. And so I actually became a part of that team because I thought this is good. I can tell you from yes, yes, yes. Hmm. Right. Well, it's like you said, a little bit of it is reliving it, but there was compounded stress because I absolutely wanted to make any input I had on the trial as valuable to the jury as I could. I was under stress just to do my absolute best. Obviously, I'm just going to tell the truth and the facts of which I knew, but I wanted to make sure I did that so clearly and precisely, that there could be no ambiguity or anything of what had happened. So yeah, the first trial they tried him for the murder of Paul Hale and Michael Walker simultaneously, and obviously they had tons of witnesses, but I had a kind of a major part as far as the time on the stand testifying. So I did what I could. Um, and the jury returned the verdict of guilty for the murder of Michael Walker, and then was a hung jury on for the conviction on Paul Hale. Yes. And I was so disappointed in myself. I thought I'd done something wrong. I thought you know something in my testimony wasn't right to convince somebody. Um, and what made me feel a lot better was I can't remember if it was the victim witness coordinator or somebody, but they had found out, and this is more hearsay than anything else, that one of the members of the jury was morally opposed to the death penalty, and they were scared if they found him guilty that he might get the death penalty, and the way they could quote unquote fix that was to, yeah, exactly. Yeah, he. Hmm. Yeah. Yes. Yes. Maybe it's naive of me, but I had really hoped the jury knew that the physical change in the appearance wouldn't have changed the facts of what happened that day. And I had just really hoped that after you heard from all the witnesses, all the forensic scientists, that would surely outweigh just a mere physical change there in the courtroom. And I think it did for almost all of them. Well, for all of them, actually. Yes. Hmm. Hmm. Yes. Hmm. I, I do, but and the conviction was most dire to me because I was a witness to the murder of my friend. I knew it happened. So the conviction was just vital that he be held responsible for this murder that I saw. That there was in my mind it couldn't have happened any other way than a guilty conviction because I saw it. I was there, and that was the biggest uh, factor for me to see done was the conviction. As far as the death penalty, I have to leave it up to the the jury or the judge, whatever the cases may be. And I've kind of always been like that. Convictions were key, if you could, but if and in this case I was a witness, so it just had to happen that way. It is, it is. Mhm. I did. Well, I stayed on for and got a full service retirement, so that's 30 years in North Carolina. I think I went through a lot of different ranks and positions, and I had a very rewarding and fulfilling career. I, I did not, um, and if anything else, it was to tell the story, to keep Paul's memory alive, but more so if my experience could, and anything about my experience, whether it was the tactics, whether it was the mental conditioning, the anything, if there was any aspect of this that could help another officer in a similar situation or even a dissimilar situation, if there's anything that I could train, that I could do to the future officers to help them through whatever they might encounter, uh, then I wanted to do that. So it became a vital mission. Well, everybody says things can change in an instant, and it's almost become um, it's an overused expression that, your life can change in an instant. And having seen that, you really begin to appreciate life more. Your relationships, every breath you take on this earth, I just learned to appreciate and be grateful for everything. Whether it's, the other people, just the things I'm doing. Um, so kind of holistically, that's how it affected me. Yeah, eh, yeah, right. And a lot of people, and it's not their fault, but they can get stuck in a rut. Whether it's guilt or depression, and things can go really dark for them. And so that's I stayed on the critical incident stress debriefing team, and that was kind of my side mission, my side quest, so to speak, was to help other officers who had subsequently gone through critical incidents, but also to train all the new officers. Dr. Teague retired from the department, but he was replaced by Dr. Erickson, Julian Erickson, also a wonderful psychologist who was very enthusiastic about carrying out the CISD program. And you know, that become, like I said, that became like a side quest, was to become involved in that. Uh, Well, I still have a lot of guilt about could we have done something different? And I think it was one of the critical debriefing sessions. I think somebody said, if you had new information that you didn't have back then of course you would have done something different. If you'd have known he was the actual shooter and not a witness, then you wouldn't have even approached him at all. You would have called the SWAT team or something. And if, I came to believe that that's true. If we had additional information, we would have handled it different. The department would have handled it different. But given the same facts that we were given that day, there's not police work can be a dangerous job. You have to make field interviews. You have to do investigations, and it's not like you can mother hen the officers yourself or the officers all the time. Sometimes officers are just asked to do dangerous things. Um, and in this case, we just thought it was a field interview. Um, but I'd like to tell Paul, if we could have done anything different to get you out of there, that we could have. But I think the most important thing, if I could relay to him, I'm a little bit of a spiritual person, and I think he knows this anyway, but was the immense support that the community gave um, his widow and his two little girls after that. Yes, and the parents, Richard and Patty Hale, his parents. It was just what the department did for them and what the community did for them. It was a different time. The community was closer to the police department back then, and police officers killed in action well, it seemed like it was much less frequent. And so this was a serious thing, and I think the community really turned out, and the police department really turned out to help the Hale family. Um, I still remember the funeral. I can't remember how many hundreds and hundreds of police cars came from just about every state east of the Mississippi River. The procession from Paul's Church on Falls of the Neuse had gone all the way down Millbrook Road, up Glenwood Avenue to the cemetery there, and the tail had not even come out of the parking lot. And of course, Raleigh, that's across the entire width of the town, and just such an incredible show of support. And again, I think Paul knows, but um, you know, it, we kept at the police department. We kept his parents as very dear friends. They were invited to everything up until they had passed away, and they showed up. They were involved with the Raleigh Police Department a lot. His daughters grew up into two very beautiful, successful ladies, Jessie and Steffi, and I love seeing them. I'm glad I could tell the story. And again, it's mostly to keep Paul's memory and sacrifice alive.